What's good, everybody? What's good? Welcome to this little bit of a talk on Opinionated. Of course, I am your guy, Resla, and I wanted to talk about a conversation that I was having after a panel about people who need to start taking responsibility and to stop blaming the previous generation or even their parents for the kind of conditions that they're in currently. I know I've had conversations with people in the streets or people that's been on other panels and such, but I don't think I've really ever made the strong emphasis on it. I do know I made a video as well as probably even some shorts about the older generation who was turning around and mentioning. Oh, actually, that's exactly what it was. It was older generation basically asking if the younger generation still had values. But there is also this thing when it comes to the younger generation who then shove all the blame on all the previous generations as to why they're living the type of lives they're living now. While there is some validity as to what they're saying, it's not the entire, it's literally one slice to a bigger pie. And I believe that this is something that happens throughout all generations. So it's not the fact that something special is happening to you and your generation. It's just your turn, to be honest with you, because people who were boomers blame the silent generation. People who were Gen Xers, who were also able to benefit from the boomers, they did their thing and they dropped the ball as well. And then you have people who are millennials. Hi, I'm a millennial. Who you have people in Gen Z and even those who are coming up in Alpha who are most likely going to blame my part of the generation as being people who screwed them up. And it's just so funny to see that because when we see a lot of people in Gen Z, we see them screwing up on their own. It has nothing to do with us. It's just so weird for myself because I'm like, I'm old enough to say that I can see how a lot of people in Gen X have been moving and I can understand how their things were. And I can also take a look at the people who are, sorry, not were, who are Gen Z and looking at the aspects of the world that they're coming in, especially in the digital age. See, I am old enough. I'm 42. I'm old enough to say that there was a time when me coming up in the world where I know the internet didn't exist. And I have had some experience with the internet not being a thing and then growing up with the age of the internet building versus people who grew up in the world, Gen X and those prior, who did not have the internet and then they had to come along as well. And then those who in Gen Z who the internet has always been a thing for them. I'll ask a question like I asked a question some time ago. I was on a person's panel some time ago, and I like this content creator because I love the way that he thinks. He's very calculated what he says. He's very good with his speech. He's very effective when I think it's communication. And that is a content creator by the name of Aaron O. And I was on his channel. This was some time ago though, but I'm vividly remember the situation where there was a young, well, he could have been young. I'm not too sure. He was definitely younger. He was probably younger than I was, probably. And he was basically blaming the younger generations for the way how his outlook in the world is, and saying that there are people in his generation that's necessarily they're working hard. They're necessarily working harder, or even twice as hard, or even three times as hard, and he didn't think that it was fair. Keep in mind, uh, I will say the same thing for like my generation, the same way how I will say for his generation, if he's of the younger generation, put it that way. Neither one of us have had to work in a field. None of us have had to work about slavery and being hunted down or being in churches that were being set on fire or had to worry about being lynched or ever had to show any kind of freedom papers ever at any time of our lives. I think that if he is of the younger generation or even within my generation, that he has had plenty of ample opportunities to make the most contributions that he could to himself in order to be at a beneficial position. Now, I will honestly say that not everybody starts the race at the same time. And that has been the same thing through time immemorial. Everybody has always entered the race somewhere ahead or behind. I always say that some people are fortunate to be ahead and they fall behind. Some people have been started out at the bottom and they were fortunate to still run ahead of everybody. And some people have been in the middle, and either they have stayed in the middle, they have fallen behind, or they have moved ahead. It's all about the individual who trains as hard as they do to become either front runners or those who fall behind in that race. And while people don't wish to look at life as a race of being equal, it's not. It is a marathon, but most of all, the thing that they don't really tell people that should be evident is that it's a competition. While you may not want to compete with other people, you will always be judged by another person. You will always be judged based on the value that you provide versus that of another person. But to go back to the original point about blaming the previous generations, and of course, like I said, every generation is responsible for something that that the next generation could blame them for, that can give them a fault for. But my question, my initial question, the question that really matters in this is, regardless of what generation you come from, at what point in your years when you become an adult, when you are no longer in the nest, when you're on your own, when you're taking care of your own business, when you are paying your own bills, when you are starting families of your own, when you are living on your own to seek out education for betterment for yourself, at what point, at what age, at what level do you find yourself responsible for the decision that you make, when you are responsible for your ish? And you cannot look at the previous generations and put them at fault for the way how the current junction of your life is going. At what age is that? At what age do we turn around and have to look in the mirror and say, I need to take responsibility for my ish? At what age do we look at the actions and look at the roadmap that we are trying to create for ourselves and say, it's not my mom's fault. It's not my dad's fault. It's not my grandmother's fault. It's not my great grandmother, my great grandfather, my grandfather's fault. At what point do we turn around and say that the only person who needs to be accountable for the things that we are doing in life, you and I looking in the mirror, is us? I'm sorry. The person that you decide to be for the future, that has nothing to do with your parents. I get it. They could have probably done more given their circumstances, but they could have also given you less. You could have had no parents at all. Because damn for sure, if you're a person who had two parents, there are people who had no parents, foster system, or just had to ride it out, who have made something of themselves. There are people with only one parent. And there are people who have two parents. There are people who were born with money and have gone through the worst. And there are people who haven't had any money and have done phenomenal for themselves. It's about the desire and the ambition of the people in general. Stop looking to blame other people for the decision that you have to make. And I get it. I get it. It's easy to coast. It's easy to blame someone else for your struggles. But here's the truth of the matter. You have the same information that everybody else has. Because you have access to the internet. It may not be in your home. It could be in your phone. And if it's not in your home and in your phone, believe it or not, you can still get to libraries. I don't know of a public library that does not have internet. I do not know of one. And most people have a phone. If you don't, even if you manage to get a phone that didn't have any service, the majority of those phones still have Wi-Fi. And if you're a person like I am who live in the state of New York, there are plenty of places where you can get Wi-Fi for free. There is really no excuse this day and age as to why you cannot be curious. Because that's really what this comes down to. When were you going to be curious enough to take action for yourself? Most of the things that I hear from people that want to blame other generations for how their life is currently moving are not really curious to take charge of their own life. That's just the way how I look at it. Well, you can just say, well, I didn't know. And my parents never told me. But at the same time, were they supposed to? Your parents are not supposed to know everything. And at some point, as a free thinking, cognizant, smart, intellectual individual, I wouldn't even say intellectual, just intelligent individual, someone who is capable of learning, someone who is capable of curiosity, someone who is capable of questioning. At what points in time are you going to take responsibility for the things that are only for you to choose? It is not any other generation's responsibility for you to choose what kind of career path you want to be on, how many kids you want, what kind of life that you want to leave for yourself, for your spouse. What what kind of spouse are you gonna pick? That has nothing to do with any other generation. That has to do with the choices that you make as a individual, as an adult. Because you're the one who make those free choices. Who you sleep with, who you marry, how many kids you have, what kind of career that you're on, how much effort do you put in that career, the school that you go to, how much education you put in that school. If you decide to go to school, you may not want to go to school, but you have all those choices. You cannot blame any other generation at this point when you realize that you should wake up. And then when you do, when you say, I need to be accountable for me, I need to really stop looking at other people. I get it. I had a disadvantage in life. Many people did. Shut the fuck up. I for sure did. And I can have a whole conversation with you about how my life turned out, what my life was like growing up. I can have no problem having that conversation with you. But I don't blame the previous generation for it. I don't blame my parents for the way how I turned out. Because at some point I had to look in the mirror and I had to say, this is between you and you. I had to do that. I had to look back and say, you know what? The reason that I didn't do well in this particular job is because I didn't put everything into it. Hey, the reason why I had this type of relationship that may not have worked out is because of me. I had to take the aspects of the things that I could have done better on. Maybe I didn't work as hard. Who knows? Hey, the reason why I don't have as much money in my bank account is because I didn't think very well about, say, finances. There are people who are like that. There are people who are not financially savvy. Not because no one didn't teach them money, it's because they weren't curious about money. That's their doing. And as the individual, these are the choices that you're gonna have to contend with every day of your life. You guys have a word, it's called adulting. Welcome. You're an adult. You stay opinionated. Grow the hell up.